Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take your insights, stack them up against the best research, and really try to unearth those hidden connections that make the world around us, well, truly fascinating.
It's always exciting to see where these explorations take us.
Yeah, and today we're doing something a bit special. We're diving into a specific place that holds, it sounds like, profound meaning, not just for us exploring it now, but for one of our amazing listeners.
Oh, great. Who are we hearing from?
We recently got a message from Brad Barfield, who runs the Ashley County Now Facebook page and website out in Arkansas. And Brad shared this really incredible, almost, intuitive perception about the bottomlands of Ashley County.
Okay.
He told us, and I really want to quote him directly here because it captures it so well. He said, "Everything here magically does some wonderful things. Our soil is alive, the roots, the fungi, the floodwater, all of the crawfish and fish and bugs and mammals and everything, one big organism that is all alive."
Wow. That's quite a statement. It really captures a deep feeling.
It really does. And Brad, what a profound insight. That feeling you described, that the land, the water, the creatures, just everything, is one big living organism, that's precisely what we're going to unpack today.
So that's our mission for this deep dive.
Exactly. We want to explore how cutting-edge science and maybe some ancient wisdom don't just sit side by side, but actually converge. How they reveal the Ashley County bottomlands not just as, a collection of parts, but as a single living, breathing entity.
A kind of micro-Gaia, if you will.
A micro-Gaia. I like that. And it's fascinating how Brad's intuitive leap, that gut feeling he has, seems to align so perfectly with where modern scientific understanding is going.
It really is. And as we'll hopefully demonstrate today, scientific inquiry doesn't necessarily dismiss that feeling. It actually validates this holistic view, grounding what might feel like an almost spiritual sense of place in concrete, observable processes.
Right. We can actually show how the very systems that define this unique landscape provide the evidence for his insightful observation.
Exactly. We're giving the science legs to that intuition.
So for this deep dive, we're drawing heavily from a really in-depth study of the region. Specifically, a document called The Soul of the Bottomlands, an ecological and human history of Ashley County and the Saline-Wichita Confluence.
Okay, so a pretty focused source.
Very focused.
Yeah.
But we're also weaving in other crucial ecological and historical insights to really, hopefully, bring this living landscape to life for you, the listener. We're aiming to guide you through what the source calls the bones of the land.
Its geology, its foundation.
Yeah, and its flow of life, the rivers, the forests, the connections.
Physiology of the place.
Right, and the deep human imprint it carries, the history etched onto it.
And by the end, you should really see why this place isn't just, dirt and water. It's this incredibly complex, self-regulating superorganism.
Get ready for some, hopefully, genuine aha moments, because this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack this. Brad's moment of clarity, as he put it, about Ashley County being this unified living organism that feels like the perfect starting point.
It really does. It's that steady realization, isn't it? Where all the separate things you notice, the soil, the river flooding, the specific trees, the wildlife, maybe even a sense of history, they just kind of click. They coalesce into this single unified understanding.
Yeah, it stops being a list of features and becomes this dynamic, integrated whole. But is that just a feeling? I mean, can we pin that down?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And it's where science and maybe philosophy really start to talk to each other. That intuitive leap Brad described, it isn't just subjective fluff. It actually resonates deeply with some really old philosophical traditions.
Like what?
Well, like Taoism, for instance, which always emphasizes harmony with nature, the flow of energy, the inherent interconnectedness of absolutely everything. Think about the concept of qi, that life force flowing through the landscape.
Okay, I see that connection. And scientifically?
Scientifically, it aligns remarkably well with the Gaia hypothesis.
Yes, James Lovelock back in the 70s. Some listeners might not be familiar, so maybe give us the quick version.
Sure. Basically, the Gaia hypothesis proposes that Earth itself functions like a giant, self-regulating superorganism. It suggests that all the living things, the biosphere and their non-living surroundings, the atmosphere, the oceans, the rocks, they're all tightly integrated.
It's not just that they exist together.
No, they form a single complex system that actively maintains the conditions suitable for life on the planet. So life and the environment don't just coexist, they co-evolve. They're constantly interacting and adjusting to maintain a balance, a kind of planetary homeostasis.
So Brad's description of Ashley County It's like seeing that huge global idea playing out on a smaller regional scale.
Exactly. It's a perfect microcosm of that larger concept, a microgaia operating right there in the bottomlands.
So it's definitely more than just a fleeting thought. It's a deep perception. The source material mentions what human geographers call a sense of place. How does that tie into this idea of a living organism?
A sense of place is that really powerful, emotional, almost psychological connection that people form with a specific location.
Mhm.
It's that gut feeling, that unique identity or character that a place seems to radiate. You just feel it's different.
And for Ashley County, the source emphasizes the confluence of the Saline and Wichita rivers, which Brad also highlighted. That's key, isn't it?
It's absolutely crucial. That confluence isn't just a spot where two rivers meet on a map, it's a nexus. It's where powerful ecological forces, deep historical currents, and even cultural meanings converge. And when you perceive all of that together in its totality, it genuinely creates a palpable, unique identity for Ashley County.
So science isn't trying to debunk that intuitive sense.
Not at all. If anything, science provides an evidence-based language to describe why that interconnectedness feels so real. It gives us the vocabulary, the mechanisms for that feeling that something much larger, something unified is at play.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so scientifically, what does it mean for a place to be a living organism? It sounds a bit poetic, but there has to be some hard science there. Where do we start looking for the biological machinery?
Well, we can approach it using different scientific lenses, almost like looking at different organs or systems within this larger organism. Take ecosystem ecology, for example.
Yeah.
This field shows us how ecosystems like the bottomland hardwood forests in Ashley County function as these highly integrated systems. They're not just collections of trees. Think of them like organs in a body constantly filtering water, cycling nutrients, adapting to changes, all to maintain a dynamic balance.
So they're not static, they're always adjusting.
Exactly. They are resilient networks shaped by water, life, and geology over vast stretches of time. They're always in motion, always responding.
That idea of resilient networks sounds like there's constant interaction, maybe self-correction happening. What are the actual mechanisms that let the bottomland self-correct and keep this balance?
Right, and that leads us straight into systems theory and the concept of homeostasis, like how our bodies regulate temperature.
Yeah.
The bottomland functions as a complex integrated system. A change in one part, maybe the water level drops, or a certain animal population booms, or even just shifts in the activity of microscopic soil microbes. That change doesn't stay isolated. It ripples through and affects the entire whole.
So everything's connected.
Everything. And like a healthy body, this system shows homeostasis. It self-regulates to maintain its internal balance. Think about the floods. They're not necessarily disasters in this context. They're essential pulses. They prevent stagnation, deliver fresh nutrients, basically clean the system out.
Okay, so the flood is part of the regulation. What else?
The huge root systems of the trees act like massive filters for water. Animal populations help maintain balance through things like eating plants or insects, dispersing seeds.
So checks and balances built in.
Exactly. Now, disruptions like, say, heavy logging can throw things off, cause erosion, loss of species, but the system also has this remarkable built-in capacity to recover and adapt, at least up to a point. It really functions like a dynamic, living metabolism.
Okay, metabolism filtering. Are there other systems? Like, is there a nervous system? A way information travels?
This is where it gets really mind-blowing. There's this concept called the Wood Wide Web.
I've heard of that. It sounds amazing.
It is amazing. We're talking about these vast networks of mycorrhizal fungi, tiny microscopic fungal threads called mycelium that connect the roots of trees and other plants underground.
So they physically link the trees.
They physically link them. They either wrap around the roots or actually penetrate them, forming this massive hidden web that stretches through the soil. It can connect dozens, maybe hundreds of trees, even trees of different species, into a single functioning network that can span huge areas, maybe the whole county.
Wow, so it acts like a decentralized brain and nervous system for the forest.
That's a great way to put it. It facilitates communication and resource sharing. And this isn't just a neat metaphor, it's a scientifically documented biological reality happening right under our feet.
That is genuinely incredible. And Brad mentioned his place, his feeling, being near that confluence of the Saline and Wichita rivers. Does that specific spot play a special role in this living organism idea? Is it like a central organ?
It absolutely seems to function that way. That confluence, just a couple of miles north of Highway 82, it's a really special nexus, a kind of hydrological hotspot.
Hydrological hotspot. Tell Tell me more.
So you have the Saline River coming down from the Ouachita Mountains to the north. It gathers water as it flows southeast, and then, bam, it merges with the much larger Ouachita River right there in Ashley County.
And they're different kinds of rivers, aren't they?
Very different. The Saline starts as this clear, gravelly mountain stream, but by the time it reaches the confluence, it's transformed. It's become a slower, meandering, almost delta-type bayou, so you get this distinct personality clash, or maybe emerging right there. A faster, clearer stream hitting a deeper, slower river. That sounds like a powerful mix.
It creates this huge basin, about 65,000 acres of interconnected rivers, creeks, sloughs, backwaters, lakes. It's incredibly complex. And during big floods,
What happened?
the amount of surface water in that basin just explodes. It can go from its usual 15,000 acres to over 36,000 acres. It basically turns the landscape into this vast, shallow inland sea for a while.
Wow.
So that physical reality makes it both a scientific place, because of its unique water dynamics and ecology, but also, as Brad felt and as indigenous cultures have long understood, a deeply spiritual place.
Because it's where these different ecological worlds literally merge.
Exactly. They merge and create something new, something incredibly dynamic and vital. That confluence isn't just a point on a map. You could really argue it's the beating heart of this Ashley County microgaia.
Okay, so we've got this idea of Ashley County as a microgaia, a living thing with its own internal systems. Now let's dig down a bit, literally, into what the source calls the bones of the land. Right, the geology, the soil, and how they hold this deep memory. Memories of incredible forces, ancient events.
Because you can't understand the living organism today without understanding its foundation, right?
Precisely. The dirt of Ashley County isn't just passive stuff that life happens on. It's a dynamic archive. It's a physical record of immense geological forces and really deep time. To get a handle on the living system now, we have to understand the foundations it's built on.
And those foundations hold memories of, well, sudden, violent upheaval, but also slow, life-giving accumulation over millennia.
A real mix of processes.
And what a foundation it is. The source talks about this landscape being forged by seismic shock. The legacy of the New Madrid seismic zone. We're not talking about distant rumbles here, are we? This hit hard.
Oh, absolutely not distant. We're talking about the winter of 1811-1812. A series of over 2,000 catastrophic earthquakes just convulsed the Mississippi Valley alluvial plain.
2000.
Yeah, it's almost unimaginable. Eyewitness accounts from the time describe trees shaking so violently, their tops just snapped off.
Yeah.
The ground visibly rolling like ocean waves. Huge cracks opening and closing in the earth. And the effects were directly stamped onto the land right there in southeastern Arkansas.
And the most dramatic evidence wasn't even found right away. It came later from the air.
Exactly, decades later. Which leads us to these incredible sand blows. They sound dramatic, almost violent.
What exactly are they? How do they form?
They are dramatic. They're basically geological scars, usually around 10 to 30 meters across, maybe 30 to 100 feet, but some can be much bigger. They happen when the intense shaking from a really big earthquake, we're talking magnitude 6.0 or higher hits, layers of sand buried underground that are saturated with water.
Okay, wet sand deep down.
Right. The shaking liquefies it. It turns into this pressurized slurry, sand and water mixed together, and this slurry gets forced violently upwards through cracks and fissures in the overlying clay layers.
So it erupts.
It erupts onto the surface, forming these low mounds or ridges of sand, a visible footprint of the underground cataclysm. People who lived through the New Madrid quakes described seeing a chaotic mixture of the elements, where sand, mud, water, and stone coal were reported to have been thrown up 30 yards high, the earth literally convulsing and spewing out its insides.
That's incredible imagery. And the evidence, these sand blows, were starkly visible in those 1939 aerial photos from the Department of Defense. They show them spread all across the eastern part of Ashley County.
Yeah, it indicated a massive soil liquefaction field, much more extensive than people had realized just from ground observations. A clear sign of just how powerful those quakes were in this specific area.
So what happened to them? If they were so clear in 1939, where are they now?
Well, that's the fascinating and frankly kind of sad part of the story. It's about their erasure. While these sand blows were like these stark, pale scars on the landscape in those 1939 photos, decades of intensive farming have taken their toll.
How so?
Relentless plowing, year after year. land leveling to make fields flatter and easier to work, natural erosion accelerated by agriculture. All of these things have progressively obscured and, in many areas, just completely eliminated the physical evidence of the sand blows.
So they've vanished.
Pretty much. By 2006, when they looked at modern digital aerial photos, virtually all traces had disappeared from the cultivated parts of the landscape. Gone.
So this physical erasure of geological scars, it feels like it illustrates something bigger, almost tragic. It's not just about the sand, is it?
No, I think it really symbolizes a broader theme. The progressive loss of the land's deep memory under the relentless pressure of modern human use, just like the physical proof of ancient earthquakes gets plowed under and forgotten.
So do other memories.
Exactly. So too have the magnificent virgin forests, the native prairies that were once there, the clear signs of how indigenous people used and shaped the land. They've all been cleared, fragmented, and largely forgotten. The dirt of Ashley County is literally losing its recorded memory. Its complex, ancient history is being simplified, flattened with every pass of the plow. It speaks to a deeper loss of understanding, maybe, of the land's true, complex nature.
But the dirt itself, it isn't just inert stuff, right?
Right.
Brad specifically said, our soil is alive. How is that true, scientifically speaking?
He is absolutely spot on. The soil in Ashley County, like healthy soil everywhere, really has this dual nature. On one hand, yeah, it's a geological inheritance. It's a gift from the rivers.
Wow, so.
Well, the county sits in both the Mississippi alluvial plain and the West Gulf coastal plain. The eastern delta part is defined by these deep, incredibly fertile, silt-loam soils like the McGehee, Arkabutla, and Stuttgart series. These were deposited over thousands and thousands of years by the flooding of the Mississippi and its tributaries, like the Arkansas and the Wachita.
So that's the mineral foundation.
That's the inorganic foundation, the rich mineral matrix laid down by the slow, patient, powerful work of water-carrying sediments.
Okay, and then there's the other side, the living part. What makes it so vital?
Right. And this is where modern soil science just opens up a whole new world. Healthy soil isn't just dirt, it's a vital, living ecosystem. It's a biological entity absolutely teeming with life. Billions of bacteria, fungi, algae, protozoa, nematodes, other microbes, they form the base of what the source calls an elegant, symbiotic ecosystem.
That's the literal living soil.
That's it. A complex, constantly interacting community that performs functions absolutely essential to the health of the entire landscape above it. It regulates how water flows and gets stored. It sustains all the plant and animal life above and below ground. It filters and buffers potential pollutants. And crucially, it's constantly cycling critical nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. It's the absolute engine room of the entire bottomland organism.
And this living nature, this bustling activity, must be especially obvious in those bottomland hardwood forests, right? What's going on there on the forest floor?
Oh, absolutely. Nowhere is this living soil more apparent. Think about all the leaves falling from the deciduous trees every year, the oaks, the sweet gums. They create this deep layer of litter on the forest floor.
Okay, lots of leaves.
And that organic matter makes the soil incredibly rich in nutrients. That richness, in turn, allows the trees and shrubs to produce tons of fruits and nuts, what ecologists call mast. That mast is a critical food source for a huge range of wildlife, especially through the winter.
So the soil feeds the trees feed the animals.
Exactly. And that deep litter layer isn't static. It's a bustling hub of activity. It's a complex food web all on its own. There's this unique community of invertebrates, earthworms, leeches, snails, tiny crustaceans, aquatic insects thriving in that moist environment. They are tirelessly breaking down the leaves and wood debris,
To decompose.
the primary decomposers. And they're joined by this vast, unseen universe of microbes, bacteria, and fungi again that really drive the decomposition process, releasing those nutrients locked up in the dead leaves back into a form that living plants can absorb and use. It's a constant, efficient recycling factory running 24/7.
So the geology sets the stage, the biology transforms it. What about the specific chemistry of Ashley County soil? Are there unique ingredients that make it tick?
Yeah, there are some key characteristics. The Holocene alluvium is really important. These are the relatively young sediments deposited by the rivers just over the last 10,000 years or so since the last ice age ended.
So fresh material, geologically speaking.
Right. Carrying fresh mineral material eroded from way upstream in the Wachita Mountains. And within this alluvium, the clay minerals are particularly fascinating, especially a type called smectites.
Smectites, what's special about them?
These are expandable clays. They can actually swell up to maybe 15 times their dry volume when they get wet. Think of how sticky gumbo mud gets.
Okay, I can picture that.
And here's their magic, so to speak. They have a huge surface area at the microscopic level, and they carry a negative electrical charge. This allows them to act like tiny biological batteries.
Batteries? How?
They hold on to positively charged nutrient ions things plants need, like calcium, magnesium, potassium, holding them loosely until the plant roots are ready to absorb them. They prevent these vital nutrients from just washing away with the water.
So they're not just passive dirt, they're active storage units, regulating the nutrient flow. That sounds like a built-in resilience mechanism right there at the foundation.
Exactly. It's crucial for the fertility of these soils. And the landscape also shows distinct chemical gradients. Think of it like the land having its own internal diagnostic system. The very colors and textures of the soil tell a story about what's happening chemically underground.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, so on slightly higher ground, like natural levees along the river, where water drains pretty well, the soil gets oxygen. Under those conditions, iron in the soil tends to oxidize, basically rust, giving the soil reddish or brownish colors.
Okay, red means oxygen.
Generally, yeah. But then you go into the lower areas, the back swamps, the abandoned channels, the sloughs where water sits for long periods. The soil is heavy clay, poorly drained. Oxygen gets used up quickly by microbes. This leads to reduction chemistry.
Meaning no oxygen.
Right. And under those conditions, iron compounds turn grayish or greenish. You might get the formation of sulfur compounds, sometimes giving off that rotten egg smell if you dig into it. And organic matter tends to build up because decomposition slows way down without oxygen.
And these visual clues, these color changes and textures.
They're called redoxamorphic features. They are literally the land's way of showing us its chemical balance, how water moves through its system, where it stays wet, where it dries out. They're critical indicators of the soil's internal health and function.
And within this sort of chemical playground, you've got those microbial chemists doing their work. The bacteria, the fungi. What kind of numbers are we talking about? And what exactly are they doing chemically?
The numbers are just staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. Every single gram of healthy topsoil that's about the weight of a paperclip can contain up to 10 billion bacteria. Billion with a B. Plus maybe a million fungi, thousands of protozoa, hundreds of tiny worms called nematodes. These are the real unsung heroes. They are constantly cycling the essential elements. Carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, between different chemical forms, transforming them, making them available for plants to use, locking them up, releasing them again. It's nonstop.
And what happens during floods when there's no oxygen?
That's when the anaerobic bacteria take over. These are microbes that thrive without oxygen. They perform different chemical tricks, producing compounds like methane gas or hydrogen sulfide, that rotten egg smell again. While these might seem like waste products, they're actually essential parts of the system's function under flooded conditions. It's all part of the natural chemical transformations happening constantly in this living soil. It's a continuous, dynamic chemical factory running underground.
And this factory is always making new stuff too, right? The source mentioned mineral weathering. What's that about?
Yeah, it's this continuous slow-motion process of transformation. Arkansas is actually really rich in natural clay resources, things like ball clay, bentonite, kaolin are mined elsewhere in the state. And right there in the bottomland soils, new clay minerals are constantly being created through chemical weathering.
How does that work?
Basically, minerals like feldspar and mica, which were originally part of rocks in the Ouachita Mountains, get transported down by the rivers as tiny grains in the sediment. Over time, as they sit in the soil, the slightly acidic soil water slowly dissolves them, releasing their chemical components, silica, aluminum, potassium, etc.
But they break down.
And then these components recombine in the soil water to form new secondary clay minerals like the smectites we talked about. It's literally rock becoming soil, becoming the building blocks for life. And the soil's pH, typically around 6.5 to 7.5 or even a bit higher in these bottomlands, strongly influences which chemical reactions happen and which nutrients are most available for plants at any given time.
So it's this incredibly tight link between the non-living minerals and the living organisms.
Absolutely inextricable. It makes the dirt not just a stage for life, but an active, living participant, a vital organ in the body of the landscape, constantly breathing, expanding, contracting, transforming.
That brings us to another really critical aspect of these bones of the land, the pre-settlement mosaic. We often have this romantic image of untouched wilderness as just this endless, uniform sea of giant trees. But the source really challenged that, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Even though forests covered something like 96% of Arkansas before European settlement, it wasn't just one monotonous thing.
So what was it like? What was this organism like before the massive human intervention of the last couple of centuries?
Well, the dominant feature, yes, was the magnificent virgin forest, especially in that eastern delta part of Ashley County. We're talking towering oaks, gums, ash, cypress trees. Imagine stepping back in time into that forest before the big logging boom.
Try to paint a picture.
It wouldn't just be trees. It would be like walking into a cathedral of ancient wood. Oaks and sweet gums may be hundreds of feet tall, their branches forming this dense canopy way overhead, filtering the sunlight into these shifting, dappled patterns on the forest floor. You'd hear the constant rustle of leaves underfoot, the calls of countless birds, maybe parrots back then, perhaps the distant splash of a beaver, the quiet crunch of a black bear moving through the undergrowth. A place just humming with life, entirely self-sustaining.
A truly powerful image. And in the western, more upland parts of the county.
There you'd find more of a mixed shortleaf pine, loblolly pine, mixed in with hardwoods like oak and hickory. And those 1939 aerial photos, even decades after a lot of logging had started elsewhere, they still captured this remarkable remnant of the original bottomland forest.
How much was left then?
Nearly 15,000 contiguous hectares. That's over 37,000 acres of uncut virgin bottomland forest, mostly right along the Saline and Waukeeta rivers. This was forest so wild, so frequently and deeply flooded, that it had basically resisted large-scale logging efforts up to that point. It was just too wet and difficult to get into.
But it wasn't only forest, right? The source talks about other ecosystems that were woven into this, ones that are now almost entirely gone.
That's a crucial point. Interspersed within this predominantly forested world were other vital ecosystems. Those same 1939 photos show clear traces of large prairies that existed on the older geological terraces, slightly above the active floodplain. Places like Smith Prairie, which historical accounts suggest once covered thousands of hectares.
Prairies. Yeah. In the middle of all that forest.
Yes. And these weren't just static patches of grass. They were dynamic systems maintained by a critical ecological force. Fire.
Fire ecology again.
Yeah.
It seems so counterintuitive that fire would be a good thing for a landscape like this.
Yeah.
How did fire create this mosaic?
It was absolutely fundamental. For millennia, you had frequent, low-intensity fires sweeping through the landscape. Some ignited by lightning, sure, but importantly, many were intentionally set by Native Americans.
Why would they set fires?
For lots of reasons. To clear brush for easier travel, to improve grazing for deer and bison, to stimulate the growth of useful plants, to manage pests. These frequent cool fires burned along the ground, clearing out the understory, killing off young trees that weren't fire tolerant, but generally not harming the big, thick-barked pines and oaks.
So it didn't create a wasteland.
Quite the opposite. The result wasn't the dense, choked, brushy forests we often see today after decades of fire suppression. It was a much more open, almost park-like woodland and savanna, a patchy mosaic of forest stands, grassy openings, and areas of exposed mineral soil where certain plants could thrive. This landscape was actively managed and shaped by its human inhabitants long before Europeans arrived.
And then there were the canebrakes. They sound almost legendary now, like something out of an old adventure story.
They were legendary. And real. Vast, dense stands of river cane Arundinaria gigantea, which is actually a native species of bamboo once lined the waterways, the riverbanks, and creek bottoms for miles and miles. Imagine walls of cane, maybe 20 feet tall, incredibly thick.
And they're mostly gone now.
Almost entirely gone. Cleared for agriculture, mostly. It's now considered a critically endangered ecosystem. But these canebrakes were a keystone habitat. They provided essential food and dense cover for numerous wildlife species. Swamp rabbits, maybe Bachman's warblers, even bears used them. And just as importantly, they were a vital cultural resource for native peoples like the Caddo. They used the cane for everything: building materials, baskets, mats, arrow shafts, blowguns, fishing traps, you name it.
So that romantic notion of a pristine, untouched wilderness really gets replaced by something much more complex, doesn't it?
It really does. It's a picture of a landscape that was, as Brad intuitively felt, a very lived-in place. It was a dynamic system constantly being shaped by the interplay of natural forces like floods and fire, and the deliberate actions of its indigenous inhabitants, the Caddo and others. They weren't just passive residents, they were active ecological agents, co-creators of the very landscape they called home.
Okay, so we've explored the bones of the land. Now let's shift to its flow of life. To really grasp these bottom lands as a living organism, we need to get into its physiology, right? The dynamic systems that circulate energy, transport information.
Exactly. And the source material makes it absolutely clear. The region's lifeblood is its water, flowing through this incredibly complex network of arteries and veins.
And this riverine system acts like the core circulatory system for the whole organism.
That's a perfect analogy. The ecological identity of Ashley County is fundamentally defined by the convergence of these two major riverine arteries, the Wachita and the Line.
Tell us about.
Well, the Wachita River is a major waterway of the South. Historically, it was a vital corridor for steamboat traffic, connecting the interior to the Mississippi and beyond. Now, it's managed for navigation with a system of locks and dams.
Okay, so a managed river. What about the Saline?
The Saline is really special. It's the primary tributary feeding the Wachita in this region, and remarkably, it's the last major undammed, free-flowing stream in the entire Wachita Basin.
Wow, the last free-flowing one.
Pretty much. And it has that split personality we mentioned. It starts way up in the Wachita Mountains as this clear, cool, gravel-bottomed stream. But as it flows down across the coastal plain and into the delta, it gradually transforms into that slow, meandering, sediment-rich bayou by the time it reaches its mouth in Ashley County.
So you get these two very different river personalities coming together, creating this unique hydrological blend right there at the confluence.
It's a very dynamic blend.
And the defining characteristic, the pulse of this whole system, is the seasonal flood. The source describes it beautifully, not as a disaster, but as a regular life-giving pulse, the very heartbeat of the bottomland ecosystem. How does this heartbeat actually sustain life there?
It's absolutely the primary engine driving this ecosystem. It's the rhythm the entire landscape dances to. When the rivers swell, usually in the winter and spring, and spill out over their banks, they deposit those nutrient-rich alluvial sediments onto the floodplain.
Like delivering fresh topsoil.
Exactly, delivering fertilizer and new soil year after year. This process also recharges the groundwater, keeps the soil saturated, and critically, it dictates which plants and animals can survive and thrive in this constantly changing environment. Only species adapted to periodic flooding can make it here long-term.
We see this reflected in the river level data, right? Those aren't just numbers. They represent this life-giving surge.
Precisely. You look at the historical and even recent data. The Saline River up at Rye hit over 31 feet back in May 1968, and even just this past spring, in April 2025, it reached almost 31 feet again. The Wachita at Camden shows similar dramatic swings. A record flood back in 1882 hit an astonishing 46 feet, and it was over 42 feet in April 2025. These fluctuations aren't anomalies. They're the powerful surge that sculpts the land and fuels its biology.
So it's this predictable, vital cycle. And the confluence area, especially within the Felsenthal National Wildlife Refuge, sounds like a critical hub for all this activity. Can you describe its function in a bit more detail?
Yeah, it really is. The confluence zone within Felsenthal creates one of the most significant and complex wetland systems anywhere in the region. This is where the faster, clearer waters of the Saline officially merge with the deeper, slower Wachita. It forms that vast 65,000-acre basin we talked about: rivers, creeks, sloughs, oxbow lakes, all interconnected.
And during big floods, it becomes that shallow inland sea.
Transforms completely, expanding from maybe 15,000 acres of water surface to over 36,000 acres. And this entire hydrological network, this whole basin, functions precisely like a big kidney system for the region.
The kidney system, that's such a great analogy for how a living organism cleanses itself. How exactly do these bottomlands filter and regulate water on such a massive scale?
It really is a fitting analogy. Scientists widely recognize bottomland hardwood forests for their critical role in regulating water quality and flow. Think about it. The incredibly extensive root systems of millions of trees, plus the deep, spongy organic soils.
They act like a giant filter.
A massive natural filter. As floodwater spreads out and slows down moving through the forest, the trees and soil trap immense amounts of sediment. They also buffer potential pollutants, with microbes breaking some down and the soil binding others. Imagine millions of tiny sponges and intricate natural sieves cleaning the water.
Okay, filtering. What else?
At the same time, the sheer size of the floodplain provides enormous storage capacity for floodwaters. When the rivers are high, the water spreads out over those tens of thousands of acres, slowing its movement downstream. This significantly reduces the peak flood levels further down the river system, protecting communities and infrastructure.
So it's flood control naturally built in.
Exactly. So if you think about it, the constant flow of the rivers is like the system's circulation. The seasonal flood pulse is its heartbeat. And the intricate network of waterways, the sloughs, the bayous connecting everything is like its nervous system, carrying water, nutrients, sediments, and life across the landscape.
And studies confirm this filtering capacity.
Oh, yeah. Studies looking at things like total dissolved solids in the Saline River Basin clearly show how activities upstream can impact water quality, but they also show how the natural buffering capacity of these wetlands helps regulate things like pH, dissolved oxygen levels, and pollutant concentrations. It demonstrates that feedback loop we talked about, the system actively working to maintain its internal environment, its health.
Okay, so if the rivers and floods are the circulatory system and the heartbeat, what about the forest itself? The source calls the forest a superorganism. How does that actually manifest?
Well, it's because that bottomland hardwood forest is so much more than just a random collection of trees standing near each other. It really functions as a highly integrated, communicative, and adaptive superorganism.
How so? What makes it integrated?
For starters, the visible forest is incredibly diverse and structured. Specific tree species aren't just randomly scattered. They occupy distinct niches determined by very subtle variations in elevation and how long an area typically stays flooded. Ecologists call this microtopography.
Give me an example.
Okay, on the slightly higher ridges within the floodplain, maybe just a foot or two higher, areas that drain a bit better and aren't flooded quite as long, you'll find species like cherry bark oak and sweet gum dominating. They like slightly drier feet.
In the lower spots.
Down in the lower flats and slows, areas that stay wet for much longer periods, that's where you find the real flood-tolerant specialist trees like overcup oak, willow oak, and the classic bald cypress. They can handle having their roots submerged for months at a time. This precise arrangement, the sorting of species according to conditions, it's like the specialized cells within an organ, each adapted to its specific role, contributing to the function of the whole forest.
And some of these trees are incredibly old, right? Like living monuments.
Absolutely. There are remnant patches of old-growth forest in the region where you can find these ancient individual trees. White oaks that have been aged to 250 years old. Sweet gums over 350 years old. These are living testaments to the forest's former grandeur and resilience.
But the real nature of the forest as this single interconnected entity that lies hidden, doesn't it, under the soil?
That's where the true magic happens, in that vast and ancient biological network we touched on earlier, the Wood Wide Web.
Right, the mycorrhizal fungi linking everything together.
Yeah.
It's still kind of hard to wrap my head around an entire forest having this sort of decentralized brain.
Yeah.
How exactly does this fungal network transmit information? What kind of messages are passing through it?
It is truly remarkable stuff. These microscopic fungal threads, the mycelium, form that physical link, connecting the roots of potentially hundreds of trees, even different species, into this single functioning web. And this underground network serves several absolutely critical functions.
Like what?
First, resource sharing. It acts like a pipeline, a conduit for transferring vital resources between trees. Carbon, for instance, in the form of sugars produced during photosynthesis.
The tree's food.
Exactly. It can be shared from, say, large, well-established mother trees that are getting plenty of sunlight through the fungal network to support smaller, shaded saplings struggling underneath them. It's like a subsidy program.
Wow. What else gets shared?
Water and essential mineral nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, that the fungi are much better at foraging from the soil than tree roots alone. The fungi gather these nutrients and distribute them throughout the network, potentially directing them to trees that need them most.
So it's a massive underground plumbing and food distribution system. That's already incredible. But you said communication too.
Yeah, this is maybe even more startling. Research suggests trees can send biochemical distress signals through these mycelial links.
Like a warning system.
Exactly. If one tree is attacked by certain insects or pathogens, it might release specific chemical compounds into the fungal network. Neighboring trees connected to that network can potentially detect these signals and ramp up their own chemical defenses before they are even attacked themselves. It's an early warning system.
That is absolutely astonishing. A forest that talks to itself.
In a way, yes. And finally, all this, the resource sharing and the communication makes the entire forest more resilient as a single unit. In the really challenging environment of the bottomlands, with those periodic floods, soils that can lack oxygen, this underground support system is crucial. It helps seedlings survive, improves nutrient uptake for everyone, and boosts the overall health and stability of the entire forest community.
So this scientifically documented reality, this networked, communicating, cooperative forest. It really provides stunning validation for that intuitive feeling Brad had, right? The landscape as a single living organism with a collective intelligence.
It really does. The mycorrhizal network truly functions like the forest's decentralized brain and circulatory system, all rolled into one hidden underground web.
Which brings us perfectly to the individual players within this superorganism. The source talks about keystone engineers and foundational species.
Right. These are the species that play these disproportionately critical roles. Their presence, or sometimes their absence, has these cascading effects throughout the entire system.
They're like linchpins holding it all together.
That's a great way to think about it. Or like crucial organs or systems within the larger body of the bottomlands performing vital functions that ripple through the whole ecosystem. Take the American beaver, Castor canadensis.
The ultimate ecosystem engineer.
Absolutely. The quintessential example. Beavers aren't just passive inhabitants. They actively redesign their environment to suit their own needs, but with profound consequences for everything else around them.
Through building dams, obviously.
Exactly. By felling trees and constructing dams from logs, branches, and mud, they fundamentally alter the local hydrology. Their dams slow down the flow of streams and small rivers, causing water to back up and spread out, impounding it.
Creating ponds and wetlands where there weren't any before.
Precisely. They create this mosaic of ponds, marshes, and saturated wetlands, often in areas that were previously just forested floodplain.
And that creates habitat for a whole bunch of other species, right? Essentially making new rooms in the organism's body.
You got it. These newly created wetlands dramatically increase local biodiversity. They provide critical habitat for a huge array of other species: waterfowl, shorebirds that need shallow water, fish that thrive in slower water, amphibians, reptiles, plus mammals like mink, muskrats, and river otters that prey on or utilize these wetland inhabitants.
So they're biodiversity boosters.
Hugely. And furthermore, beaver ponds are incredibly effective natural water purifiers. As water slows down behind the dam, it drops its sediment load. The wetlands trap enormous quantities of sediment, carbon, nitrogen, and other nutrients that would otherwise just wash downstream. Over time, this builds fertile soils and significantly improves water quality for the entire river system below the dam.
So the beaver isn't just another animal.
Not at all. It's a primary architect of the bottomland habitat, actively shaping its very form and function. A true keystone species.
Okay, if the beaver is the architect, who's the chief provisioner, the one that, feeds everybody, the critical food source for this bottomland organism.
That role would undoubtedly fall to the mighty oak tree, the Quercus species. Particularly the various species of red oak found in the bottomlands, trees like Nuttall oak, Shumard oak, cherrybark oak.
Because of their acorns.
Exactly. Their acorns, collectively known as mast, are an absolutely foundational pillar of the bottomland food web. These acorns are packed with energy, fats, and carbohydrates, and they become a critical food source that sustains countless wildlife species, especially through the lean times of fall and winter.
Like what kind of wildlife depends on them?
Oh, a huge range. White-tailed deer rely heavily on acorns. Wild turkeys gobble them up. Squirrels, of course, are famous for hoarding them. And historically, black bears depended significantly on acorn crops to fatten up for winter. The health and abundance, the sheer carrying capacity of the forest for a significant portion of its animal life, is directly tied to the success or failure of the annual acorn crop.
So the oaks are absolutely indispensable food factories.
Couldn't have bottomland wildlife communities as we know them without productive oak forests. They are fundamental.
And then there's a species that serves as more of a haunting reminder, maybe. A symbol of what's been lost. The ivory-billed woodpecker. Its story tells us so much about the ecosystem's former state, doesn't it?
It really does. The historical presence and subsequent apparent extinction of the ivory-billed woodpecker, Campephalus principalis, serves as this powerful bioindicator, a living symbol of the ecosystem's former grandeur and complexity, and also its vulnerability.
It was a magnificent bird, right?
Yeah.
The biggest woodpecker in North America.
The largest north of Mexico, often called the Lord God bird, because people would exclaim Lord God when they saw one. It was once a resident of the vast, mature, virgin bottomland hardwood forests of the southeast, including right there along the Saline and Wichita rivers, in the very areas that would later become the Felsenthal Refuge.
And its habitat needs were really specific.
Extremely specific, and that tells the story of what's been lost. It needed immense, contiguous tracts of old-growth forest. Not just big trees, but specifically forests with numerous large, recently dead or dying trees.
Why the dead trees?
Because its primary food source was the large beetle larvae that live under the bark of newly dead or dying trees, the ivory bill used its massive beak to peel off large sheets of bark to get at these grubs. It needed a constant supply of these specific trees over a huge area to sustain a population.
This is the widespread logging of those old-growth forests.
Was a death sentence for the ivory bill. The logging fragmented the forests, removed the old trees, eliminated those specific foraging conditions. Its disappearance is a direct consequence of that habitat destruction. Its absence today is this haunting testament to the loss of ecological integrity, a silent signal that the system, while still alive, is definitely a shadow of its former, more complete, more magnificent self.
So it's not just about these big, charismatic animals like beavers and woodpeckers, is it? It's the whole fabric of life, the interconnectedness of everything, even the smallest creatures.
Absolutely. That's what truly holds the system together and demonstrates its complexity as a living organism, the broader biodiversity and the intricate trophic webs, the food chains. Think about creatures like crayfish, the mud bugs Brad mentioned.
What role do they play?
They burrow deep into the mud, which helps aerate the soil, especially in those wet areas. They shred dead leaves, recycling nutrients, and of course they are a crucial food source for a whole host of predators, wading birds like herons and egrets, raccoons, mink, even owls sometimes.
Those predators play their roles too.
Definitely. Owls, for instance, are well adapted to the mix of pine flats and hardwoods in the county. They help control rodent populations, which can indirectly benefit plant growth by reducing seed predation. Larger animals like deer act as browsers, influencing plant communities, but also dispersing seeds in their droppings. Bears, when they were more common, would forage for grubs in rotting logs, turning over soil, creating micro-disturbances that benefit certain plants. Everything is connected.
And all this abundance stems from the diversity of habitats within the bottomlands.
Yes, that mosaic is key. You need the high ground ridges for refuge during floods, the shallow sloughs for wading birds, the deeper channels for fish, the mature forests for cavity nesters. It's a keystone system where removing one element, like maybe polluting the water and killing off the crayfish, or introducing a disease that wipes out the oaks, can cascade through the entire food web.
Like the example of DDT thinning eagle eggshells.
A classic example. A chemical applied somewhere else accumulates up the food chain and has devastating effects on the top predators, disrupting the entire ecosystem balance. The Ashley County bottomlands boast incredibly high biodiversity, over 100 native tree species alone, plus countless invertebrates, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. All these species illustrate how this landscape organism is held together by this intricate, often delicate fabric of critical interspecies dependencies. It's a web.
This whole story of Ashley County is just so rich, and it feels completely inseparable from the story of the people who've lived there. The source frames it as a very lived-in place for millennia. Which brings us to the human imprint. And it's a story of really profound contrasts, isn't it?
It really is. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the human history here is a journey. It starts with this deep, long-term spiritual integration with the land, a sense of being part of it. Then it shifts dramatically to a period of rapid, almost violent extraction. And that culminates in a legacy of industrial contamination that continues to impact the health of the ecosystem and the human communities within it, even today.
It sounds like a story of a fundamental shift in worldview.
Absolutely. From seeing oneself as an integral part of a living reciprocal system to seeing that system merely as a collection of resources, of commodities to be consumed.
So before the American settlers arrived, we had the Caddo world. The source talks about a sacred confluence, suggesting their very origin story was rooted right there. Tell us more about their deep connection to this specific place.
Long before the first European surveyors came through drawing lines on maps, these lands of Ashley County were home to a really sophisticated and enduring civilization. The human presence here is incredibly ancient, stretching back at least 10,000 years. There's a mound site down near Wilmot at Lake Enterprise that might actually be the oldest Native American mound in all of Arkansas, dating way back to the Archaic period.
10,000 years.
Deep roots. And this long history culminated in the Caddoan Mississippian culture, which really flourished from about 800 AD up until around 1700 AD. These were not nomadic hunter-gatherers wandering through. They were settled people, building permanent towns and villages, farming the land.
And they weren't just surviving. It was a truly advanced society, deeply connected to those fertile river soils.
Absolutely. They were a sophisticated, sedentary, agricultural society. Their entire civilization was built upon the incredible fertility of the soils in the Great River valleys. The Ouachita, the Saline, the Red River were absolutely central to their world. They developed complex agricultural techniques, cultivating corn, beans, and squash, often in small fields right on the natural levees, working with the floodplain's natural cycles, not against them.
And they supplemented farming with hunting and fishing.
Oh, expertly. They hunted deer, bear, turkey. They fished the rivers and backwaters using intricate nets, weirs, traps. They gathered the abundant nuts, fruits, and berries from the forest, and they were master craftsmen.
What kind of crafts?
Their pottery is just exquisite, beautifully decorated, often with intricate symbols that archaeologists believe reflect their cosmology, their worldview. They also famously made these incredibly powerful bows from the wood of the Osage orange tree. The French called it bois d'arc, wood of the bow. These bows were highly prized and traded across vast networks, reaching far beyond the Caddo homeland.
And we find archaeological evidence of them right there along the Saline.
Plenty of it. Ceremonial mounds, village sites, pottery fragments, stone tools, other artifacts. Clear evidence of a long-standing Caddoan presence all along the Saline River Valley and at important resource sites, like places where they could evaporate water to get salt.
And their connection wasn't just practical, getting food and resources. It was deeply spiritual, wasn't it? Water, especially, held sacred power for them. How did that spirituality shape their relationship with this landscape?
That's a critical point. Their worldview didn't separate the physical and the spiritual in the way we often do. The land itself was alive, animated. Their world was populated by a host of spirits residing in animals, plants, rocks, springs, and rivers, all presided over by a supreme being they called Ayanat Kadi, the leader above. Water, especially the powerful, flowing rivers that were the lifeblood of their territory, was imbued with sacred power. It was seen as a conduit between different worlds, a source of life and renewal.
And this ties into the confluence being special.
Directly. This spiritual geography provides this profound context for that intuition we keep talking about, that the confluence of the Saline and Ouachita is a special, maybe even sacred place, because the Caddo creation story itself is rooted in just such a location.
Tell us about that.
Their oral histories, passed down through generations, describe their ancestors emerging from an underground world, from a cave they called the Place of Crying, located right at the confluence of the Red River and the Mississippi River further south. This foundational myth establishes the river confluence, the place where great waters meet, as a place of cosmic origin, a liminal space where different worlds connect, where life begins where their people first came into being.
So the feeling that Brad and maybe others have today about the Saline-Ouachita confluence being special, it's not just a modern appreciation of nature. It's potentially an echo of this ancient archetypal understanding.
It absolutely could be. It makes the confluence both a scientific place, due to its unique ecology, and a spiritual place, in this very deep, historically grounded, meaningful sense.
It's incredible how those layers overlap. But this deep, integrated relationship between the Caddo and their riverine world, it faced a profound rupture, didn't it?
It's truly profound and heartbreaking rupture. The eventual abandonment of those Caddo villages along the Ouachita and Saline rivers, mostly after 1700, marks this major turning point.
What caused it?
It was a combination of devastating factors, primarily driven by the arrival of Europeans and the diseases they carried. The Caddo, like other native peoples, had no immunity to diseases like smallpox and measles, which swept through their populations in catastrophic epidemics. This massive population loss, combined with increased conflicts with other tribes who were also being displaced and pressured, and sometimes direct conflict with Europeans, led to the collapse of their traditional society and forced them to abandon their ancestral homes along these rivers.
A rapid and irreversible decline.
A severing of that ancient, integrated relationship between a people and their sacred riverine world. It left the land relatively depopulated, setting the stage for a completely different kind of human imprint.
Which leads us directly into the Great Severing, as the source dramatically calls it. The arrival of American settlers in the 1820s and 30s initiated a fundamentally different relationship with the land. They saw it primarily as resources, right? Things to be exploited for profit.
It raises that crucial question. What happens when a worldview rooted in integration and reciprocity is suddenly replaced by one focused on extraction and commodification? When the first U.S. surveyor, Nicholas Ryder, came into the territory in 1826, his reports back emphasized the abundance of timber, the plentiful game, and the abundantly fertile soil, ready for cultivation.
Seeing dollar signs.
Essentially, yes. This perception of immense, untapped natural wealth fueled the rapid establishment of completely new economic and social order, the founding of the county seat, Hamburg, in 1848, and the explosive growth of a prosperous plantation economy based on cotton and corn cultivation. This was all built quite literally on clearing those vast bottomland forests.
And critically, built on forced labor.
Absolutely, critically. We cannot separate the transformation of the land from the institution of slavery. By 1860, right before the Civil War, a staggering 3,761 people out of Ashley County's total population of 8,590 were enslaved African Americans. They represented a huge portion of the labor force that physically cleared the forests, greened the swamps, and cultivated the fields that generated the wealth of the planter class. Their forced labor was the engine driving this initial phase of landscape transformation.
That initial land clearing for plantations sounds like just the beginning, though. The source talks about a pre-forestry exploitation era that came later, especially after the railroads arrived in the 1880s. That unleashed systematic liquidation on an almost unimaginable scale.
It was a dramatic and brutal escalation. The expansion of railroads into southern Arkansas opened up these previously inaccessible forests to industrial-scale logging. Large lumber companies, many financed by Northern capital, swooped in. They bought up vast tracts of virgin pine and hardwood forest, often for pennies on the acre, sometimes through fraudulent means. And then they began this systematic process of liquidation.
This wasn't sustainable forestry.
Not even close. It was purely industrial extraction, driven by a ruthless cut-out-and-get-out mentality. They treated the ancient forest, which had taken centuries, millennia to develop, as a one-time commodity, like a massive bank account to be emptied as quickly as possible with no thought for regeneration or long-term consequences. Companies like the Crossett Lumber Company, founded right there in 1899, became enormous industrial enterprises that completely transformed the landscape and the local economy, but at an immense ecological cost.
And the ecological consequences were truly catastrophic, weren't they?
Yep.
It wasn't just the removal of the trees themselves.
No, the ripple effects were devastating. The scale of the destruction is hard for us to even fathom today. By 1929, an informal survey estimated that out of about 22 million acres of forest land originally in Arkansas, something like 20 million acres had already been cut over at least once.
Almost the entire state.
Virtually the entire forested area. And the logging methods were incredibly wasteful. They left behind vast quantities of all the branches, treetops, and unusable logs. This massive amount of dead, dry fuel on the ground led to immense and frequent wildfires.
Worse than the natural fires.
Far worse. These logging-fueled fires burned with an intensity and scale that the ecosystem had likely never experienced before. One estimate suggested 70% of the harvested area in the state was severely damaged by these post-logging blazes. They consumed the remaining organic matter in the soil, killed off any surviving seedlings and seed sources, and fundamentally changed the forest structure for generations. The result was a profoundly wounded, simplified, and impoverished landscape. Eroded soils, choked streams, lost biodiversity.
This really sounds like a fundamental philosophical shift, this great severing, a literal dismemberment of that living organism we've been talking about.
That's exactly what it was. The industrial extractive worldview, the view that sees nature primarily as an inert collection of resources, valued only for their immediate human use and profit potential, completely supplanted the indigenous worldview that saw an interconnected, living, reciprocal system.
And this philosophical shift played out physically on the land.
Absolutely. It was a core concern of deep ecology playing out in real time. The complex, living organism of the bottomlands was systematically dismembered. Its magnificent forests were fragmented into isolated patches. Its hydrology was altered by attempts at drainage, channelization, eventually dams. Its intricate web of life was torn apart, leading to the decline and disappearance of sensitive species like the ivory-billed woodpecker. This period of intense extraction didn't just take resources, it fundamentally damaged the integrity and function of the entire ecological system. And it set the stage for the next chapter of environmental degradation.
As the industrial center of Crossett, which was built on liquidating the forest,
Pivoted to new forms of production, bringing with them their own, often more insidious, toxic legacies.
and that brings us to this new insidious phase of industrial transformation centered in Crossett, leading to what the source calls the poisoned well, a legacy of pollution that affects the land and the people right up to the present day.
What's really striking here is how the environmental impact shifted. It went from the very visible physical extraction of timber to the often invisible but equally damaging release of chemical contamination. But the effect on the landscape organism and the human community within it remained profound.
So what happened in Crosset?
After the big timber company, Crosset Lumber, was acquired by Georgia-Pacific in 1962, the facility there didn't shut down. Instead, it expanded massively. It became this huge industrial complex producing paper, chemicals, plywood, a whole range of products.
Becoming the economic heart of the town.
The undeniable economic lifeblood for generations. But tragically, it also became the source of a relentless, decades-long stream of toxic pollution into the air and water. This created and still creates this profound and painful dilemma for the community jobs versus health and represents a stark case of environmental injustice. The plant is now owned by Koch Industries, continuing this complex legacy.
And the chemical footprint details are pretty staggering, aren't they? What kind of substances are we talking about? What are the known impacts?
Yeah, the data reported to the EPA is alarming. The plant has historically emitted upwards of 1.5 million pounds of toxic chemicals into the air each year.
1.5 million pounds.
Annually, including substances known to be carcinogens like formaldehyde, dioxin, acetaldehyde, and chloroform. Residents have reported for years that the air in Crosset often carries this foul odor, sometimes described like rotten eggs or burning chemicals, that stings your nose, burns your eyes, makes it difficult to even be outside comfortably.
That's the air. What about the water?
The impact on the water is equally severe, if not more so. The facility holds permits allowing it to discharge up to 45 million gallons of treated wastewater per day.
45 million gallons a day. Where does it go?
It goes into a series of local waterways, first into Mossy Lake, which then flows into Coffee Creek, which locals grimly call Stink Creek, and that eventually flows into the Wacutta River just upstream from the Felsenthal Refuge. And this effluent, even after treatment, contains a complex stew of pollutants.
And the data we have from that Table 1 in the source really puts the sheer volume of this chemical load into perspective. It lists daily discharge averages.
Right. And those numbers are huge. Let's just highlight a few. BOD, or biochemical oxygen demand, that's a measure of how much oxygen the pollutants will consume in the water, potentially suffocating aquatic life over 24,000 pounds per day.
24,000 pounds.
TSS, total suspended solids, basically. How much particulate gunk is in the water, making it cloudy, smothering bottom habitat over 37,000 pounds per day.
37,000.
And AOX, adsorbable organic halides. This is a class of chlorine-containing organic compounds, often linked to paper bleaching processes, some of which can be very persistent and toxic over 2,000 pounds per day. Plus significant amounts of heavy metals like copper, mercury, zinc.
These aren't just abstract numbers. They represent this immense ongoing stress on the bottomland's kidney system, right? Affecting water clarity, oxygen levels, potentially the health of fish and people.
Absolutely. Downstream residents have documented impacts like foul odors from the water, discoloration, visible foam, or scum. And critically, many residents in Crosset firmly link this long-term exposure to what they perceive as unusually high rates of cancer, respiratory illnesses, and other serious health problems in their community.
And this raises that crucial question of fairness and justice. The source points out that this immense pollution burden hasn't fallen equally on everyone in Crosset.
No, tragically it hasn't. Historically and continuing today, this immense pollution load has disproportionately impacted Crosset's African American community. Predominantly, Black neighborhoods are situated closest to the plant, particularly to the south and east, putting those residents on the front lines of exposure to both air emissions and contaminated water sources.
That pattern where a minority community bears the brunt of industrial pollution, that's a textbook example of environmental racism, isn't it?
It is. It starkly highlights how the sickness of the ecosystem, the pollution overwhelming its natural systems, inevitably becomes the sickness of the human community embedded within it, particularly the most vulnerable parts of that community.
But the community hasn't just passively accepted this situation. They've been fighting back for decades, haven't they? How have they tried to hold the plant accountable?
They absolutely have, with remarkable courage and persistence against incredible odds. Local leaders like Pastor David Bowie of the group CrossIt, Concerned Citizens for Environmental Justice, along with regional allies like Cheryl Slavant, who heads the Ouachita Riverkeeper organization, have fought tirelessly for accountability for years.
What kind of actions have they taken?
They've organized residents, held meetings, collected detailed health surveys documenting widespread illnesses and concerns. They've commissioned their own independent air and water test to challenge the company's data and the adequacy of regulatory monitoring. They've repeatedly petitioned state and federal regulatory agencies, the EPA and the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality, ADEQ, demanding stronger permits, better enforcement, and cleanup actions.
And how have the agencies responded?
Well, that's been a major point of contention. The response from EPA and ADQ has often been criticized by residents and advocates as being frustratingly slow, inadequate, and perhaps overly deferential to the industry. It reflects the immense political and economic power wielded by a major employer like Georgia-Pacific and now Kirk Industries in a state like Arkansas.
There was a consent decree recently then.
Yes, an amended consent decree was reached between EPA, the Justice Department, and Georgia-Pacific in 2020. It required the company to pay a $600,000 civil penalty and fund several supplemental environmental projects in the area. But for many residents who feel they've suffered health impacts for generations, these measures felt like too little, too late, insufficient to truly address the scale of the historical harm or ensure future protection.
So putting it back in our analogy, the Bottomlands natural kidney system has been completely overwhelmed by this constant influx of industrial waste. It's like a chronic disease in the landscape organism.
That's precisely the picture. The pollution from CrossIt represents a chronic illness, a profound disruption of the system's natural ability to cleanse itself, its homeostasis. It's like the body battling a severe, persistent infection. And the regulatory actions, while necessary, often feel like a form of environmental dialysis.
Dialysis?
Yeah, an external, artificial, and ultimately incomplete attempt to manage the symptoms of the disease without fully addressing the underlying source of the contamination or truly restoring the system's natural capacity for health. And the resulting social conflicts, that painful economic precarity of the company town, pitting jobs and economic survival against community health and environmental quality, those are the agonizing side effects. It demonstrates in this really visceral way how the sickness of an ecosystem inevitably becomes the sickness, the deep divisions within the human community embedded within it.
It's a heavy history. But despite these profound wounds, the story of Ashley County isn't only one of degradation and pollution. It's also, remarkably, a story of resilience, and increasingly, maybe one of restoration. The contemporary landscape feels like a place of these deep contradictions, wounded, yet still alive, polluted, yet actively being restored in places.
What's really fascinating and hopeful here is seeing how conscious efforts are now being made to try and mend that torn web, recognizing the intrinsic value of this complex living system, even after all the damage. And right at the heart of the region's ecological system, you find this crucial sanctuary, the Felsenthal National Wildlife Refuge.
Which was established back in 1975. Why was it created?
It was established partly as mitigation. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was implementing the Ouachita Black Rivers Navigation Project, which involved dredging channels and building locks and dams to facilitate barge traffic further up the Ouachita. The Felsenthal Lock and Dam, located right near the confluence, was a key part of that project. The refuge was created, in part, to offset the unavoidable environmental impacts of damming the river and altering the natural hydrology.
And this refuge is huge, isn't it? Covering parts of 3 counties and protecting that absolutely critical confluence zone.
Yes, it's an impressive area, about 76,000 acres, spreading across Ashley, Bradley, and Union counties. And its location is key. It specifically protects that vital confluence where the Saline River merges into the Ouachita. You could really see it as preserving a vital organ within the larger bottomlands organism.
And it's not just one uniform habitat type.
Not at all. Felsenthal NWR is this incredibly rich mosaic of interconnected habitats. It contains vast expanses of bottomland hardwood forest, of course, but also areas of higher ground upland pine and mixed forests. And critically, that complex network of sloughs, bayous, oxbow lakes, and the massive 15,000-acre Felsenthal Pool, which is the reservoir created by the lock and dam.
That sheer diversity must mean incredible biodiversity, right? It sounds like a biological treasure chest.
It really is. The official species lists are amazing. Over 1,150 species of plants and animals have been documented on the refuge. It's a biodiversity hotspot. It's particularly vital as a wintering area for migratory waterfowl, ducks, and geese flock there by the thousands, earning it recognition as a globally important bird area by the National Audubon Society.
Any particularly rare species found there?
Significantly, it's the only national wildlife refuge in Arkansas that supports a population of the federally protected red cockaded woodpecker. That's a species that depends specifically on mature, old-growth pine forests, which the refuge manages carefully, highlighting its unique habitat value.
And beyond the biology, does it protect the human history too?
Yes, that's an important aspect. The refuge also meticulously protects over 200 known Native American archaeological sites, primarily Caddoan villages and camps, safeguarding that deep cultural history, the human imprint, right alongside the ecology. It recognizes the long relationship between people and this land.
Managing such a complex system, especially with the altered hydrology from the dam and the upstream pollution issues, it must be a monumental task.
Yeah.
What are some of the big challenges they face?
Oh, it presents immense and ongoing challenges for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service managers. They have to constantly balance that primary mission of wildlife conservation with demands for public use. Hunting, fishing, boating, bird watching are all very popular there. They have to manage ecosystems within a highly altered hydrological regime because the water levels in the Felsenthal Pool are now controlled by the lock and dam operations, not by the natural flood pulse of the river. That changes everything for the plants and animals adapted to the old rhythm.
And invasive species, are they a problem?
A huge problem. The refuge constantly battles invasive species, particularly feral hogs, which cause enormous damage. They root up sensitive vegetation, destroy archaeological sites, muddy the waters, and compete with native wildlife for food. It's a constant fight. And as we mentioned, being downstream, the refuge is inherently vulnerable to water quality issues coming from upstream industrial sources like crossset and agricultural runoff from the entire watershed. Even a protected area can't completely escape the environmental health problems of the larger region it sits within.
So if that industrial era represented the great severing of the ecosystem, the establishment and ongoing management of Felsenthal NWR feels like a conscious societal attempt to preserve, maybe even begin to heal, a vital organ of this regional landscape. It's an admission that this complex system has immense value beyond just its raw materials.
I think that's a very accurate way to put it. The refuge stands as this crucial living laboratory for understanding the dynamics of these incredibly complex bottomland ecosystems. It serves as a vital anchor for regional biodiversity, a large area where the living, breathing nature of the landscape is officially recognized, studied, and actively managed, even with all the challenges. It's definitely a beacon of hope in a landscape that has seen so much degradation.
And beyond the refuge itself, there's broader work happening now to try and mend that web, right? You mentioned the EPA's founding in the early 70s marked a turning point, signaling the slow but significant shift away from a purely extractive mindset towards one of stewardship, at least in policy.
Indeed. And today you have a variety of public agencies and private organizations engaged in that long, challenging work of trying to mend the torn ecological fabric of southern Arkansas, including Ashley County. The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, the AGFC, plays a really central role here.
How so? What do they do?
Well, they're guided by a comprehensive state plan called the Arkansas Wildlife Action Plan. This plan identifies the state species and habitats most in need of conservation efforts. So AGFC directs funding and effort towards projects directly benefiting these priorities. This includes things like habitat restoration projects up in the Saline River watershed, trying to improve water quality and aquatic habitat upstream. It also includes managing their own wildlife management areas to create better upland habitat, like early successional areas for quail and turkey.
And they also work with private landowners, which must be crucial since so much land in Arkansas is privately owned. How do they engage those landowners?
Yes, that's absolutely vital. The AGFC has a dedicated private lands habitat division. Their biologists offer technical expertise and sometimes financial assistance programs to private landowners who want to improve wildlife habitat on their property. They might help someone manage their timber for wildlife, restore a wetland, or plant native grasses. It's about fostering that shared sense of stewardship across the landscape, not just on public lands.
And they manage their own land sustainably, too.
They strive to. The agency's management of its own extensive land holdings, around 300,000 acres statewide, is certified under the Sustainable Forestry Initiative standards, which demonstrates a commitment to balancing timber harvesting with ecological health and wildlife needs.
And what about non-governmental groups? Are organizations like the Nature Conservancy involved in restoring these bottomlands?
Absolutely. The Nature Conservancy, or TNC, has been a major player in spearheading critical reforestation work throughout the Mississippi River Delta region, which includes parts of Ashley County near the river.
What kind of projects are they doing?
A key effort is their floodplain reforestation program. This program often works with farmers who own land inside the levees, land that's frequently flooded and maybe only marginally productive for traditional row crops like soybeans or cotton. TNC helps them convert that land back into its native forested state.
So, planting trees.
Yes, planting strategically selected native bottomland hardwood seedlings, focusing heavily on oak species, but also others like cypress, ash, pecan. The goal isn't just to plant trees, but to restore the vital ecological functions that these forests provide.
Like what?
Improving water quality by filtering runoff before it reaches the river, sequestering atmospheric carbon dioxide to help combat climate change, mitigating floods by having those forested floodplains absorb and slow down excess water, and of course, rebuilding critical habitat for all the wildlife that depends on these forests. It's a really holistic approach, restoring not just the structure, but the very processes that keep the system healthy.
That's fascinating, restoring the processes, not just the parts.
That's right. There's this growing recognition in ecological restoration that simply planting trees isn't always enough. You have to try and bring back the natural processes that shaped and maintained these ecosystems historically.
Like fire.
Exactly. The use of prescribed fire, carefully controlled burning, is now a key tool for managing many forests and grasslands in the region. It mimics those natural lightning fires and the intentional burning by Native Americans that happened for millennia. It helps control invasive species, reduces the risk of catastrophic wildfire by clearing out fuel, and actually improves habitat diversity for many native plants and animals adapted to fire.
And what about restoring those cane bricks you mentioned earlier? Is anything being done about that?
That's a newer but increasingly important area of focus. Efforts are underway, though still on a relatively small scale, to try and restore some of these critically endangered riverine ecosystems. These projects are often undertaken in partnership with tribal nations, like the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians in Arkansas.
Why a partnership with tribes?
Because for tribes like the Cherokee, river cane isn't just ecologically important, it's a vital cultural resource, essential for traditional crafts and practices that were disrupted when the cane disappeared. So these restoration efforts aim to reestablish not only the ecological habitat for species that depend on cane, but also to reconnect a vital cultural link for the descendants of the land's original inhabitants. It's a beautiful blending of ecological and cultural restoration.
This collective work by agencies, nonprofits, landowners, tribes, it really represents this slow, difficult, but ongoing process of healing for this landscape organism, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's an arduous, piecemeal, but incredibly necessary attempt to mend that torn web, to reestablish some of the connections and functions that were severed during that era of intense extraction and pollution. This healing process is fragmented, for sure. It faces immense challenges, the hydrology is permanently altered, invasive species are rampant, climate change adds new stresses.
But it represents a shift.
It represents a society grappling with the consequences of its past actions and slowly, haltingly rediscovering an ecological ethic. An ethic that perhaps has more in common with the long-term stewardship practiced by the Caddo than with the short-sighted liquidation mindset of the 20th century. These are the huge strides that have been made since the environmental awakening of the 1970s. It's a testament to a renewed effort to understand and maybe even begin to care for the living landscape again.
We have truly come full circle, haven't we? Right back to Brad Barfield's intuitive flash about Ashley County being one big organism that is all alive.
Yeah.
And after digging through all this science and history, it feels like that profound realization isn't just poetic license. It's not a departure from scientific reality at all.
No, it feels like a deep and incredibly insightful apprehension of that reality. If we connect all the threads we've discussed back to that bigger picture, the cumulative evidence provides this powerful, multi-layered, evidence-based framework for the very interconnectedness that Brad sensed, the interconnectedness that defines this place.
When you view the landscape through all these different lenses, the geology, the hydrology, the soil science, the forest ecology, the human history, it truly emerges as this complex, self-regulating system, a microcosm, as you said, of those Gandhian principles.
And that self-regulating nature, that homeostasis, isn't just an abstract concept here. It's a tangible reality you can almost see happening. It's the constant effort by this landscape organism to maintain its health, its balance.
It's visible everywhere.
It is. In the hydrological kidney system of that Felsenthal Basin, still actively filtering water, buffering floods, even though it's stressed, it's present in the deep memory held in the soil, the memory of that fire-maintained landscape mosaic, a system co-created by nature and people to sustain a dynamic equilibrium for centuries.
It operates in the soil itself.
In the constant nutrient cycling happening in that living soil, that microbial engine turning death back into life. And maybe most strikingly, it's manifest in those complex communicative mycorrhizal networks, the wood wide web binding the forest into this cooperative superorganism, sharing resources, sending signals, all aimed at collective survival.
And from that Gaian perspective, the industrial pollution from Crossat, it's not just an environmental problem separate from us.
No, it's a profound disruption of the system's homeostasis. It's like a pathogenic stressor, something inducing a fever, a chronic illness, in the Gaian body of the bottomlands. It's a clear signal of deep imbalance, felt both by the ecosystem and the human community within it.
It really hammers home how interconnected everything is, even bleeding beyond the physical into the philosophical. You mentioned Taoism earlier. The source suggests the long human history here can be understood through Taoist ecological principles.
What's fascinating is how directly those ancient principles seem to apply. Think about the Caddo civilization. Living for millennia within the rhythms of the rivers, the floods, the forests, they seem to embody a form of harmony with nature. Not perfect, maybe, but aiming for reciprocity, a give-and-take relationship with the living world around them. Their worldview, which saw spirit and life interwoven with the land, guided their actions towards a sustainable coexistence.
And the industrial era.
That, in stark contrast, represents the Taoist principle of too much success, an insatiable, unchecked pursuit of profit and material expansion that runs counter to the balance and limits of nature. And, as Taoist wisdom always warns, that kind of imbalance ultimately leads to disaster in this case, ecological devastation, toxic contamination, and social disruption.
So by Taoist measures, that pre-settlement landscape, even if it didn't have modern infrastructure, was profoundly affluent.
Absolutely. Taoism judges affluence not primarily by accumulated material wealth, but by biodiversity, resilience, ecological richness, and harmony. By that measure, the pre-settlement landscape of Ashley County, with its vast, diverse forests, prairies, canebrakes, teeming with incredible life up to and including the magnificent ivory-billed woodpecker, was a place of profound, vibrant affluence.
And the modern landscape.
For all its economic output, for all its technological advancements, is in many crucial ways ecologically impoverished, ecologically less affluent. The current work of conservation and restoration, then, can be seen as this slow, arduous, perhaps insufficient attempt to regain some of that lost to affluence, the inherent richness of a healthy, functioning, diverse living system.
Ultimately, that moment of clarity at the confluence that Brad describes so powerfully, it feels like it's a perception of all these layers simultaneously, doesn't it? The profound sense of place that radiates from the meeting of the Saline and Wachita rivers isn't just a subjective feeling or a pretty idea.
No, it feels like a deep, resonant awareness of the convergence of this entire complex story. You're feeling the violent geological memory held within the soil itself. You're feeling the life-giving pulse of the rivers. You're sensing the ghostly echo of the vanished virgin forest and its lost prairies and canebrakes. You're maybe even picking up on the ancient spiritual footprint of the Caddo.
And layered on top of that,
The raw scars of industrial extraction, the invisible but potent legacy of chemical toxins still circulating in the system, and maybe, just maybe, the faint but growing pulse of ecological restoration, of attempts at healing.
So this raises that important question for you, our listener, and really for all of us. That intuition, the intuition that Brad Barfield articulated so well of this place as a single living entity. It isn't a misinterpretation of reality. It might actually be the most accurate way to see it whole, to truly understand its past, its present, and maybe its potential future.
It challenges us to see beyond the surface.
It really does. So after this deep dive into the soul of Ashley County's bottomlands, we really want to encourage you, seek out your own moment of clarity in your own local environment, wherever you are. How can you start to view your familiar landscapes? Maybe it's a city park, a local creek, a patch of woods, even just your own backyard as living systems.
What are its bones? What's the geology, the soil story beneath your feet? What's its flow of life? How does water move? What plants and animals live there, and how are they connected?
And crucially, what's its human imprint? What's the history etched onto that place? What are its scars, its legacies, both good and bad? And where are the pathways towards healing, towards restoring its health and resilience? What does that kind of deeper realization compel you to understand, or maybe explore further, about the living world right around you?
It's a journey of seeing, really.
It is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.